Hi, welcome to Archaeological. Today's video is a virtual tour of South Taranaki, on the west coast of the North Island of New Zealand. The 150th anniversaries of several important New Zealand Wars battles in South Taranaki are going to occur in 2018. So I'm going to favour those places in my site selection here. In the future, I may come back and do a tour video covering other, less martial sites. The geography of South Taranaki is a product of the volcanic activity of Mount Taranaki. Much of it consists of marine terraces covered in layers of volcanic ash and crossed by a series of rivers. The fertile soils made this an attractive area for Maori agriculture, and as an agriculturally rich area and a stronghold of Maori resistance to land sales and colonial expansion, it was a prime target for invasion by the colonial government in 1865. This tour starts at Warea Redoubt, formerly Warea Pa. The redoubt is your typical, fairly small, roughly square earthwork, with flanking bastions for enfilading fire down the length of the ditches. The gunfighter part was built on top of was considerably larger and more impressive, but with its trenches infilled, there's little to see of it today. It was the construction and occupation of this pa in 1865 that the colonial government used as a casus belli to invade and confiscate the entirety of South Taranaki. An act that would be the final straw for General Cameron, who tendered his resignation and ordered the withdrawal of British troops from New Zealand. This is an excerpt from the letter of an anonymous British officer to a London newspaper at the time. Everything looked as peaceable and as promising as could well be imagined, when the governor, seeing, I suppose, that unless he kept the troops employed, he'd be unable to retain them in the colony, suddenly directs the general to commence operations down here, working in the direction of Taranaki, the ostensible reason being to occupy a block of land that we had purchased from them, the Waitotara, and through which they declined to allow us to make a road. Now the real facts of this so-called purchase are these, and I suppose the English people will hardly credit it. The superintendent of the province of Wellington, Dr. Featherstone, agreed to purchase this block some time ago from certain natives, and paid them an instalment of £500. When the time came for concluding their bargain and paying the balance due to them, the natives wanted one particular piece, where the fighting pa now is, Warea, to be reserved for them. This Dr. Featherstone would not agree to, whereupon the owners tendered back the £500 and said they would not sell at all. This Dr. Featherstone refused to take, and got some other natives, who had not the smallest title to the land, to take the balance and sign a paper in receipt thereof, saying they had sold the whole block. The lawful owners naturally enough resented this, and this is what we're here for, to eject the lawful owners from the land they did not wish to sell, and for this England is spilling her best blood. Warea Pa was quite formidable, and General Cameron refused to attack it, instead marching his army from Whanganui around the South Taranaki coast, outflanking it, and doing his best to fulfil his orders without another bloody battle. Governor Grey was not amused at this lack of aggression, and gathered a separate colonial force to take the pa, which they did, through a cunning night march that threatened the villages behind the pa, Perikama and Areahi. They captured prisoners from there, and it resulted in the abandonment of Warea Pa. A master of self-promotion, Grey talked this victory up in the media, deriding Cameron and the British Army, never mind the fact he had taken an empty pa that had been outflanked and rendered largely redundant months before. Next we come to Kakaramea Redoubt, which is quite unconventional in its layout. It's pentagonal in design, with bastions that would be better described as ravelins. It was built by Cameron's army after the Battle of Manaia in 1865. The British army of 1,364 men were marching around the coast, and the occupants of Kakaramea village, no more than 200 of them, attempt to ambush the column before they got to the village. They were hopelessly outnumbered, and the ambush was triggered too early when they fired on the cavalry scouts. The troops stormed the dune where the Maori were taking cover, and a very one-sided fight in the open resulted. The redoubt was also the site of a war crime by the British during General Shute's campaign, when a Maori prisoner was summarily executed there. It was revealed as part of complaints by Colonel Ware, a British officer who claimed that the colonial government ordered General Shute to adopt a take-no-prisoners policy during that campaign. In 1868, the abandoned redoubt was used for cover by Ho-Hos, fighting the armed constabulary garrison of the second Kakaramea Redoubt, which is located in what are now the grounds of Kakaramea School. Moving on, we come to Thacker's Redoubt. It's another of the chain of posts which was built by the British Army in 1865. It's of the classic, simplest form, square with two flanking bastions enfilading all four sides. It has a twin built on the other side of the Manaia River called Inman's Redoubt. South Taranaki is notable in that so many of these New Zealand Wars redoubts are still visible in the landscape. In my video on Pa, I briefly featured Turuturumokai Pa, a mighty prehistoric hilltop pa with concentric rings of defensive ditches. This was once an even more heavily fortified landscape than it appears today. A smaller ring ditch pa named Pukakariki is just south of the main pa, and two other pa were once to the north of it, but they've been levelled and ploughed, so you can't see anything of them today. The inconvenient truth about Trutrumokai Pa is that it was substantially reconstructed in 1932 as part of the Work for the Dole program at the time. Different archaeologists who have studied it have written that the defences just don't make sense, and that some of the ditches may have been carved out of terraces, more or less arbitrarily, in the 1930s. It's said that the Pa had a tunnel for accessing fresh water, but it was infilled for safety reasons during the reconstruction program. As we have no images of the Pa before this work, it's very hard to tell what it was like before then. This dubious degree of authenticity is why I did not dwell on the site too long in my Pa video. So why am I looking at it now? The truth is, I'm not here for the huge Pa. This tiny earthwork to the east of it is all that remains of Turuturumokai Redoubt, a British redoubt built by the 18th Regiment in 1866. In 1868, it was garrisoned by colonial troops, and this was attacked by 60 of Titokowaru's warriors in a surprise pre-dawn raid. The main section of the redoubt fell, and the surviving members of the garrison held out in each of the bastions, while 5 of the garrison fled to Waihi for help. It was 7 a.m. before the relief force arrived, and the defenders had been fighting for 2 hours. 10 men, that's almost half the garrison, were killed. 6 more were wounded, leaving only 6 unwounded men. Trutrumokai used to be a council reserve, but has now been returned to Ngāti Whanganui and is now private property and not open to the public. Moving on, we come to Te Ngutu or Te Manu. This was Titokowaru's headquarters at the time of the attack on Turuturumokai Redoubt. The village was one of many villages burnt to the ground by the British Army in 1866, but it was rebuilt adjacent to the original site. Scorched earth tactics were employed extensively by the British and colonial troops in Taranaki. After the attack on Turuturumokai on the 21st of August 1868, Lieutenant Colonel MacDonnell, with around 350 troops, assaulted the village, storming in, and drove the defenders into the surrounding bush. The troops set the new village alight and returned to Waihi, skirmishing through the bush the entire way back. MacDonnell lost 4 men killed and 8 men wounded, and said that his force killed at least 7 Maori. The village was not completely destroyed this time, and it was repaired and fortified. MacDonnell returned to Te Ngutu or Te Manu on the 7th of September 1868. Believing it destroyed, he planned to instead attack the village of Te Ruaruru beyond it. He took with him 360 men in 3 detachments, a real mixture of troops. The force slogged through the dense bush and ended up in the rear of Te Ngutu or Te Manu. Te Kepa's division tried to work around the left flank, while Von Tempsky advanced right at it. An intense fire was opened up on them, and the disparate units behaved in different ways. The armed constabulary troops and Te Kepa's Maori troops could look after themselves, but the new recruits from Wellington panicked and struggled in the bush. Some of them fled to Waihi with reports that the entire force had been wiped out. Officers were shot, and MacDonnell hesitated at a critical time. A panicked rout began, and the different units all fled back to Waihi, losing track of each other, believing missing members to be dead. One wounded soldier, Private Dorr, didn't get back to Waihi until 4 days later. The colonial force lost 24 killed and 26 wounded, Major Von Tempsky being the most famous of the casualties. The remaining troops were disorganised and near mutinous. The Whanganui Maoris returned home. Macdonnell resigned as a result of this disaster, to be replaced by Colonel George Whitmore. Waihi, Manawatu, and eventually Kakaramea would be abandoned, and the colonial forces fell back to Patia. There are no visible archaeological features at Turuturumokai Manu today, although there were when historian James Cowan visited in 1918. It's a public campground, and there are memorials to the battle at the edge of the clearing. Moving back around the coast, we come to Motorola Pa, inland of Waverley. This was where Colonel Whitmore would try to succeed where Macdonnell failed. A monument sits at the roadside, and it's signposted from Waverley. The colonial force of around 320 assaulted the Pa, got into a fierce firefight with Maori defenders, and then retreated. The Maori defenders pursued them, harrying them all the way back to Waverley, called Warea at the time, only abandoning the pursuit when an Armstrong gun was brought out from Warea Redoubt to support the troops. Accounts vary, but Whitmore lost around 19 men killed and 20 wounded, and as a result decided to fall back even further to Nukumaru to protect Whanganui. Heading back west, Otautu is a fearsome prehistoric hilltop pa, located along and controlling a section of the Patia River. I highlighted it in my video on Pa, so instead I'll talk about the events in the area in 1869. At this point, Titokowaru's army had disintegrated at Tauranga without a fight, and the hunter had become the hunted. Titokowaru and his followers camped a bit south of the ancient Pa, in the bush atop the cliffs, dropping down into Patia River. A party of his warriors ambushed a convoy at the mouth of the Whanganui River, but were fought off without loss. Colonel Whitmore moved his force to Patia, and with 600 troops advanced on Otautu. They stumbled into the camp before dawn in a dense fog. The alarm was sounded and a firefight erupted. The camp wasn't fortified, but there was plenty of cover available for the warriors, who fought fiercely while their women and children escaped down the cliff. As the fog lifted, part of the colonial force moved to flank the camp, and the defenders, low on ammunition, scattered and fled. The colonial force lost 6 dead and 12 wounded, while Titokowaru's force lost 1. Okay, I think I'm all Titokowaru'd out for the moment. I've not gone into some of the graphic details of this war, as they're not family-friendly for YouTube. If you're interested in reading about it in more detail, I recommend Volume 2 of James Cowan's The New Zealand Wars, and James Bellich's book, I Shall Not Die. Many of these sites we've visited here were on private land, or have little for visitors to see above ground. So let's take a quick look at a couple of sites that you can visit. Hidden on the edge of the golf course at Manaia is the largely intact Warea Redoubt. It was constructed on the site of a pa during the military build-up in the 1880s that was the government response to the peaceful Parihaka movement. The redoubt has been restored. Wooden retaining walls support the banks, and a concrete reconstruction of its original lookout tower was built as part of the project. There are wooden blockhouses on either bastion that you can go into. I'll finish this tour up with a site that's slightly less warlike. Slightly. Atop a lahar mound on the westernmost point of Taranaki sits Cape Egmont Lighthouse. This cast-iron lighthouse was built in Pimlico, London, and shipped as a kit set to New Zealand, where it was assembled on Manu Island on the coast of Porirua in 1865. The lighthouse was not really needed there, though, and it was shut down in 1877. And in 1881 it was dismantled and shipped to Cape Egmont, where it was rebuilt on this site. Now, from that date, and its proximity to Parihaka, you may glean that this is not entirely a civilian site. The colonial government stationed 40 armed constabulary troops at the site to ensure that the lighthouse was constructed successfully, and once complete, the troops did not leave, but instead moved into the lighthouse, remaining billeted there in the build-up for the raid on Parihaka, and for 3 months afterwards, much to the discontent of the lighthouse keepers. Thanks for coming with me on this virtual tour of some of the New Zealand War's archaeological sites of South Taranaki. If you're in South Taranaki, I recommend stopping in at Aotearoa Museum of South Taranaki in Patia, and the Tawhiti Museum just outside of Hawera. Thanks for watching, and please share, comment and subscribe. Cheers!